Hello, my name is Joe. I would like to go through the process of brewing a batch of beer. I will cover some of the equipment needed, how I brew now, and Idaho's laws. You will need a slew of equipment, and the standard starting kit varies by company. You should have a brew kettle, a big spoon, a propane burner and tank, a plastic bucket with lid, siphoning equipment, a fermentation container with a fermentation lock, a thermometer, hydrometer and test jar, a bottle brush, bottle filler, capper, and caps, and some kind of sanitization solution. Your brew kettle is your main workhorse. It ranges from 5 gallons on up, and it's where you'll do all of your boiling and most of your mixing. The spoon can be any metal or wooden spoon that is long enough to prevent you from sticking your hand in boiling water. The propane burner should be strong enough to deep fat fry a turkey, but the higher the BTUs, the better. The plastic bucket with lid is used for bottling, mixing, and can be used for fermentation, but I don't recommend it. Your siphoning equipment should consist of an auto siphon and a decent length of hose. A recommended fermentation device is a 6-gallon carboy. Be careful because most kits only come with a 5-gallon carboy. A fermentation lock allows CO2 to escape while preventing air from coming into your beer. A thermometer is a short-range thermometer, which shows the ideal temperature for fermentation, while letting you know the temperature of your beer. Place one on your carboy and never look back. Hydrometers and test jars are used to gather information on your beer. These allow you to estimate alcohol by volume of your beer. Bottle brushes clean your bottles. A bottle cap is used to seal your beer in a bottle, and the bottle capper is the device that does just that. You should have some form of sanitizer, and I prefer One Step, which is a 10-minute cleaner and leaves no residue. Extract brewing is a simplified process for us modern people. Some kind soul acquires the grains and then goes through the mash and sparging process for you. This creates a tea-type mixture of the sugars extracted from the grain that is then dehydrated down into a powder or an extremely viscous liquid, both of which are called malt, and sold to you, the consumer. When you buy the malt, make sure to grab some hops and any additives that your recipe calls for. Now comes the fun part. Load up your brew kettle with an ample amount of water. For those of you starting out with a 5-gallon brew kettle, I highly recommend not adding more than 2 to 2.5 gallons of water, because a boil over will be a routine occurrence if you overfill with water, especially considering that hops loves to make boiling water suddenly double in size. If you have a brew kettle of 10 gallons or more, then by all means, please fill up with 6 gallons of water. And don't worry, the 60 to 65 minute boil will reduce over 1 gallon of water and hopefully leave you with a perfect 5-gallon finishing boil. A note on terminology. When you add the malt to the water, this is called the sweet wort. Wort is just unfermented beer. It has all the sugars needed to become beer, but yeast has not been added yet. After you finish your brew cycle, this wort becomes the brewed wort. Lastly, the beer you ferment in a carboy for weeks becomes known as the fermented wort, or beer for short. First and foremost, clean everything that will touch the beer. You, your pets, the table you plan on working at, the friend who wants to help out for some free beer, your utensils, and anything else you can imagine. Then place the brew kettle on the propane burner, spark it up, and get the water to a boil. Upon reaching a boil, kill the heat and add in the malt. While adding the malt, make sure to stir with your oversized spoon because it is very important to prevent any sugars from caramelizing on the bottom of your brew kettle, which can happen to any malt not fully dissolved into the water. Once the malt is completely dissolved, put the kettle back on the burner, respark it, and get the water back to a boil. Your next step is hop infusions, which is adding hops while brewing the wort, and this takes place at 3 separate times. Your initial hops addition is any time from the beginning of the boil to about 45 minutes into the boil. The first set of hops is known as bittering hops because the longer the hops boil, the more oil is pulled from them. These hops bitter the beer to offset the sweet malty flavor. The next addition of hops is flavoring hops, and these are added about 15 to 5 minutes towards the end of the boil. Finally, the aroma hops are added at the last minute of the boil, only to float around in the hot liquid long enough to impart their smell into your beer. After the 60 to 65 minute mark, your brewed wort is ready to be cooled down to the proper temperature. For ales, which are the only beers that I've brewed so far, you want the temperature of your 5-gallon batch to be around 70 degrees. This can be done with wort chillers, which are not required, ice baths, or by placing it in a room and waiting until it levels out with room temperature. From the moment you put the brewed wort into your carboy, you must be sure to keep it and anything that comes by it sanitized. Your unfermented wort is more vulnerable than the boiling wort or the finished product because it is a mass of sugars with no defense mechanism. Beer has alcohol to defend it from parasites and bacteria, while boiling water has temperature on its side. Needless to say, tiny living things hate boiling water. When the brewed wort reaches your ideal temperature, it is time to rock that fat carboy like a madman. Make sure to cover the top and then pitch your yeast. Shaking the carboy oxidizes your wort, adding in more life necessities for your yeast to have a stronger chance at fighting the good fight as long as it can. After your yeast is pitched, it's time to place your carboy in an area out of the sun and regular light and in a place that keeps a steady temperature. For the record, any type of light can alter a beer's flavor. Basically, you can totally destroy all your work if you decide to treat your beer like a sun tea. Now, depending on the strength of your soon-to-be beer, you're looking at a 7 to 15 day wait, or even up to a few months depending on the recipe. After your beer finishes its fermentation, it's time to bottle it. Bottling starts like brewing, by cleaning everything that will touch your beer. Your siphoning tube, your bottle filler, your plastic bucket, and bottles will all be scrubbed and sanitized. You will then want to boil 3/4 cups of corn sugar into a few cups of water for about 20 minutes or so. When the sugar water is done with its boil, mix it with a fermented wort, which we can now call uncarbonated beer. And hey, take a few drinks. If you've never had uncarbonated beer, it's a strange taste. After your bottles are cleaned and lined up, utilize the principles of gravity by placing the food-grade bucket containing the beer on the counter and your bottles on the floor and fill them up one at a time. Most new brewers start out with bottles that require a bottle capper. So, after filling the bottles, place a cap on top of the bottles for about 15 minutes prior to using the bottle capper to seal the deal. This little step could prevent exploding bottles, but those are pretty rare. Now, the average amount of time for the remaining yeast to take the new sugars and carbonate your beer is 3 days. But it really takes about 7 days for this whole process to settle, so I recommend waiting 7 days total. Once this is all said and done, grab some of those bottles that you've been hiding from the light of day, place them into your fridge, and wait a while. Grab a nice, clean beer glass, pour it out, and now it's time to enjoy the fruit of your labors. And finally, Idaho state laws on brewing your own beer. They're pretty straightforward. If you have one adult living in your house, you can brew 100 gallons of beer for personal use. If you have more than one adult living in your house, you can brew up to 200 gallons of beer for personal use. The only caveat to this, you cannot sell your beer to other people for profit. Well, thanks for your time. Sorry it was so quick, but I recommend if you're interested in homebrewing that you go out and buy a book, read some websites, or ask somebody that knows. Thanks again.